this is host Joanne from Dine Inn, and today I'm going to show you how to make the festive red snapper Nan Ru Claypot using only the freshest ingredients from our local farms at the virtual SG Farmers Market. And let me just introduce a little bit about the dish. And our fermented beancurd, this Nanru, is actually a type of traditional Chinese condiment that is actually made of fermented tofu, rice wine, sesame oil, salt, and soy. So this is actually very good for braising. The taste is very rich and umami, and I'm going to use this to actually braise the fish with some of the beancurd sticks, the cabbage, and everything, give you a very full flavor dish today. And this is perfect for Chinese New Year because usually some people have vegetarian during Chinese New Year, and this is actually modeled after the Luo Han Zai, which is called the Buddha's Delight in Chinese. And sometimes when people eat vegetarian for first day of Chinese New Year, they have everything vegetarian in that pot. But today, this is for, you can use it for non-vegetarian as well as have it over like Chinese dinner and stuff like that. So this has fish in it, but the flavor is also very good and rich, and usually you can have it with breakfast actually with rice or vermicelli like as a starter for Chinese New Year. Yep, so without much ado, let's start with the cooking demo. Okay, so here are the ingredients that we have today. First up, we have the red snapper, which we're going to use today from Blue Current. And this can also be substituted with the hybrid garupa and coral trout from Apollo Marine Seafood, the barramundi or the hybrid garupa from Blue Current, and also the jade perch and claris fish from Opal. Okay, so next we have the vegetables, which is the Chinese cabbage from Opal, the coriander from Yummy Sprouts, and also the Xiao Bai Cai from Yummy Sprouts, yeah? And then of course the little side ingredients, which is the mushrooms, the little baby pearl flower mushrooms, the black fungus, and the beancurd sticks. Yep, and of course this is the tofu puff. Okay, so these are the ingredients for the clay pot. So next we go on the sauces. So to make the Nanru sauce, we actually have all these ingredients, which is the most important, of course, is the Nanru, the red fermented beancurd. And we have oyster sauce, sesame oil, Xiao Xingjiu, salt, pepper, of course, corn flour, sugar, and oil to pan fry the fish. Yep. Okay, so for the mushrooms, so we can soak the mushrooms. These are actually dried mushrooms, dried baby mushrooms. So usually I just soak it in hot water for about 30 minutes. But if you're not in a rush, you can actually soak it the night before. You can just soak it in like normal room temperature water. So the reason why I soak it in hot water is because the hot water actually lets the mushrooms soften faster. Yeah. And usually, you know, roughly it will expand like about 1.5 times to 2 times in size. So for the beancurd sticks, it looks very hard, but it actually softens really quickly. So I just soak it in cool water, because if I soak it in hot water, it will actually disintegrate really quickly. So when you actually cook it again, because we're going to cook it in a clay pot again later, so it might break into 2 small pieces, and when you bite it, there's no texture, yeah? So just a cool water, and just for a while will do. Tofu puffs, I will cut it into half. It depends, if you have a big tofu puffs, you can cut it. But now the one I have is quite small, so you can choose either to cut it or you can also don't cut it. It's up to you. For the black fungus, same. It comes like dried, so it's very small. So this one we just, like I said, it's like the mushrooms. I can soak it overnight as well, and it's not a problem. It will expand. For this one, I think it will expand like 5 times in size. Once it's soft, it's like then it's done already. So next up is the veggies, and this is the Chinese cabbage. And I'm just gonna cut it small, like about 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to set it aside. And then for the Xiao Bai Cai, actually it's pretty small, so you don't have to cut it too small, because this is already in like a 1/2 inch size. So what I usually do with this is I'm just going to cut the ends so that it gets cooked easily, but still retains the shape of the vegetable. Yep. And coriander, just a few sprigs of it will do. So next, I'm just going to slice the fish. So I'm using the red snapper today, but we can actually use different types of fish. There's like barramundi, which is actually pretty popular. And then there's also the coral trout and jade perch. Yeah, so different fish, actually all of them are actually white fish. So the texture might be similar, it's just that some fish is slightly, like for the red snapper, the fillet is slightly thinner if you're going to use a fillet. So just make sure when we fry it, we don't cook it for too long, otherwise you might overcook it. Barramundi is usually thicker. And some people like to use jade perch because jade perch is actually quite an oily fish, and it's actually developed, it's actually a farm fish, right? And that people actually eat because of its high omega-3 values. It's actually a fish that is used to replace sea fish, like wild caught fish, in case like, if we have any water pollution and stuff like that. So just lightly slice the red snapper. Not too thin, because if you cut it too thin, you might not be able to taste the texture of the fish when you actually bite it. Because you want a bite to the fish when you eat it. Yeah? So what I'm going to do right now is actually to coat the fish with a little bit of flour. And what this does is actually to prevent the fish from flaking apart when we actually pan fry it and when we actually braise it in the clay pot. So it kind of keeps its shape. Right, just a little bit will do. So sometimes if we pan sear the fish, in normal recipes, we will usually season it a little bit with salt and pepper, but because we're using the Nanru, which is the fermented red bean curd, which is actually very savory and very strong flavored, so we try not to over season the fish, otherwise it might be too salty. So while I'm doing this, I'm gonna heat up the pan. So for this, the pan has to be medium hot. It has to be hot enough. Otherwise, what will happen, right, is that the flour will actually come out, disintegrate, and your fish will not be coated with the corn flour. Yeah, so you must make sure that your fire is actually hot enough. I'm just gonna turn on the fire first. But at the same time, you can't overheat your pan, otherwise your fish will be burned very quickly. And always remember, fish cooks very fast, so just a short while will do, because you just want the layer to be formed on the fish so that it doesn't break up when you actually stew it. Okay, so I'm going to heat up the pan, make sure that it's hot enough before I put some oil. So just make sure that it's coated and let it heat up before I put the fish slices in. So just make sure that your pan is hot enough, otherwise you'll see the oil becoming a little bit floury because the flour actually disintegrates if your pan is not hot enough. So this is okay because you see they're all like, just, you don't have to make sure that the fish doesn't have to be very cooked, just slightly brown, because you're going to stew it again, braise it in the clay pot later. And you don't want to overcook the fish. So we have these beautiful slices of fish. Just a while more and it'll be done. And we will set it aside on the plate. Yep. And let me just take out the fish. And as you can see, it's just slightly brown. It's a very nice golden color. And you see that your fish doesn't flake. Yeah, I'm just going to set it aside. Okay, next, I'm just going to use that same pan and just saute the mushrooms, black fungus, the beancurd sticks, as well as the vegetables. Yeah, let me just turn on the fire again. I'm just going to slowly add in the vegetables as well. So what we want to do here is just give it a very light stir fry. We don't have to overcook it because like I mentioned earlier, we're actually going to braise it again. When we are using a non-stick pan, I actually don't have to put in too much oil. Yeah, so I actually reuse the pan from frying the fish, and actually I use less oil. So I mean, of course, you can use your regular stainless steel pan, but your fire has to be the right temperature. Otherwise, it will really your fish will stick to the pan, and it might be quite messy. So we recommend you to use non-stick pan for a more healthy version of this clay pot, Nan Ru Claypot. Yeah. So just slightly stir fry, and you have this fragrance from the mushrooms and the vegetables. Not too long. So why I chose these vegetables is because the Chinese cabbage actually adds colors. Like usually we use the stem, so it's a bit whitish, and it actually absorbs a lot of flavor from the fermented beancurd. Okay, and we're almost done. So right now, like this is almost done. I'm just gonna set it aside. Okay, so now I'm just gonna make the Nanru sauce. And first thing, I'm just gonna add the Nanru inside. And then we add the all the other condiments, which is the oyster sauce, sugar, a little bit of salt, this is the Xiao. And then the sesame oil. So just let it heat up for a while before you add some water to dilute it. So it comes in cubes, so you actually need to press it down. So there are two types of fermented beancurd. One is the white one, which is the Nanru, and the other one is the red one, which is the Nanru. So Nanru, as the name says, sometimes they call it southern beancurd, yeah? And the only difference is that this is actually fermented using red wine. So the flavor is stronger and more savory. So it's just like, you know, how the French ferment the cheese. So the Chinese basically ferment the tofu. It's basically the same way of doing it, it's just that the product is slightly different. It's getting a little bit thick, so I'm just going to add some water. To dilute it a little bit so that it's not too salty. So bring it to a boil. And the next step I'm going to do is actually to thicken the sauce a little bit before adding the vegetables and the fish. So what this does is actually to allow the sauce to actually cling on to the vegetables and the fish so that the sauce is not overly watery. So I have some corn flour here and water. Just gonna put it in. Just slightly dilute. Just make sure it's well mixed, otherwise the sauce will become lumpy. And we must always make sure that the sauce is boiling before we actually add this corn flour mixture. So now it's boiling right now. I'm just going to add a little bit of this to actually thicken it. Okay, so it's better remember if it's too thick, you can add a little bit more water. So you want it to be the gravy-like. Okay, so at this point I'm just going to lower the fire. So right now I'm just going to put the ingredients. And I'm just going to slightly coat it. Because the clay pot is very hot, so just be sure not to overheat it. So once I stir in the vegetables, I'm just going to lay the fish on top. To let it slowly simmer. Okay, so if you don't have a clay pot, no worries. You can just always use a regular pot and have it as a stew. So no worries. And basically, what the clay pot does is basically it heats it up, and it's also for the visual effect. Yeah, so I'm just going to cover it and let it simmer for a while over low fire so that it doesn't burn. Okay, so for about maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Make sure that it's not overcooked, because otherwise your fish will become too hard. So once you see the bubbles coming out, this is ready. So you can just top it up with some coriander. Okay, so turn off the fire. Okay, so notice after I turn off the fire for a while, the clay pot is still bubbling. So the clay pot is actually very, very hot, and it actually keeps the heat in. Okay, so this is done. Our festive red snapper Nan Ru Claypot. the virtual SG Farmers Market, you can get your ingredients at promotional prices delivered right to your doorstep. So don't forget to apply the promo codes given, and also there'll be exclusive deals given to you by our farmers just for today. Okay, so the recipes will also be available in both English and Chinese on the SAFEF website. And for those of you who would like to purchase any ingredients to cook during this festive season, please feel free to visit the Dine Inn website or the mobile app to purchase the freshest local produce.